get ready. So get ready.
Shalom, shalom. Call Halal, Yahawashi, Yahawashi, Bahashem, Rawchaa, Qadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who taught me this truth. Salutations to the Akim, my fellow laborers, the confusion of face Akim joined unto our ranks that do this work in truth and sincerity, risking their lives and their freedom to do so. To the hopefully elect, right, the Akwathium or the Akwaf that are listening and learning. To you I say Shalom. It's your brother Malcolm coming at you with another lesson. I'm going to go into the history of the Dark Ages following the fall of Rome. And then I'm going to go backwards into Rome to the fall of Rome and who made it fall. And the people who made Rome fall were the very faces that you're looking at on the screen here. All right. And this is a history that has been covered up. I'm going to read a quote by a journalist, Hubert Marlin, all right, a journalist and writer. It says, "The whitening of British culture began 100 years before with the great-great-uncle of Oliver Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell, from 1485 to 1540. The Prime Minister of King Henry VIII will destroy 97% of all the artifacts of the country, which in general represents centuries of British history, but were no longer in conformity with the racist tone which now advocated a policy of whitewashing the history of the kingdom. Statues will be pirated, frescoes will be broken, mosaics pounded." All right, and this was a quote by Hubert Marlin, a journalist writer, okay? And you're looking at the evidence of what I just read on the screen. All right, they're saying that this is St. Maurice, but I've even seen it written that this was really Shalimar, a king. All right, and the knights were called knights because knight is associated with blackness. They were the Black Knights because they were black. They even show you in movies. There was a movie called The Black Knight. Then in that movie, The Robin Hood, they went with what's his name, with Morgan Freeman. The Edomites referred to him as the Moor. Moor is a German word which meant black. Okay? The Moors ruled Spain and Portugal for 700 years. Okay? From 700 years. That was just Portugal and Spain. But the truth be said, all of Europe was controlled by so-called Negroes at that time, who were the Israelites, okay, who were responsible for the destruction of Rome. Hence the reason why we're so hated to this day, all right, and why they've done what they've done to the Southern Kingdom, all right, to my brothers of the Southern Kingdom, I should say, all right. And I'm going to use two books as information, all right. The Negro Question, this is part 3, all right, by Lee Cummings, all right. And the next video, the next book is also by Lee Cummings. The Negro Question, Part 4, The Missing Link. So he's just giving you the information that they just conveniently leave out. All right? That they conveniently leave out. All right? So these are artifacts and different things that are collected that he put in his book. So I'm going to read a portion of book number 3. And it reads, "This book is designed to shed light on the people that came down to Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost," all right? "And it is important to you to understand this great truth, and that it is there were no Europeans in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost." Now, this is a lack of him having understanding. He does bring out a lot of information, but there's still a few things that Lee doesn't understand, or he purposely did, because if he told too much truth, they wouldn't have allowed him to print this book. Because this video itself will probably get deemed as offensive and all these other things, and will probably get deleted or restricted in some manner. So I highly suggest that anyone watching this video who's a believer in Yahawah and Yahawashi, that you download this video. All right, this is going to be a pretty vicious cut to Esau Edom, who is the so-called white man, who did whitewash and lie about history, and now is angry that the truth is coming out about what he did and who he is. All right, and this isn't about hate. This is simply about truth. But here in America, the truth has become hate. All right, because those in power have lied about the past, and now it's all coming back to bite them in the ass. Okay. It says the eyewitness accounts and scribes of the generations reflect all the people present on the day of Pentecost were black, and that's not true. All right, they were Israelites, but the Israelites had already lost some of that. They were probably way more dark or so-called black Israelites back then. But you gotta remember they were scattered. When you go into Acts, matter of fact, let me just get it. All right. Well, let me finish reading this section, and then I'll go to Acts real quick to prove that point. He said the Europeans knew nothing about, it should say Edomites, all right, knew nothing about the feast of Yahawah, and that had been recorded in the book of Leviticus, and that is fact, and I agree with him there. The Europeans, we'll say Edomites, were busy worshiping Zeus, Thor, Apollo, Aphrodite, Cupid, Hercules, and Jupiter, the same gods that the entire world is worshiping today, which is true. They just changed the names and the colors of these gods, all right? Because even those gods back then were still dark flesh prior to the conquest of Alexander of Macedonia and before the Edomites got dominion over Greece and Rome. And they took those gods and just remade them in their own images, all right? It says, this book will be like a lightning rod of light shining in the midst of a great darkness. You will see the black Jews that came down on the day of Pentecost eventually became the black Roman Byzantine Empire, which is true. It did. That's how you had your black Caesars and your black as a matter of fact, I'm going to show you a couple talking about the destruction of nose and faces. They have the tetrarchs in here, all right? Diocletian, Maximian, and Augustus, and who are the other two? And the two black Caesars, Galerius and Constantius. Let's show their faces. All right, and these were found in Italy, and once again the same thing. We talked about how they chipped off the nose and the features to try to hide the fact that they had those so-called Negroid features. All right, and these images could be found in Italy, man. All right, and I'm gonna go into the book of the Acts to prove that in the Bible now. Now we're showing you artifacts from the place and the time period. Now we're going to show you scriptures. All right. So this is first of all, let me read this. This is Psalms 85:11. And it said, truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. So the truth is springing out of the earth. All these artifacts are the eyewitness that tell a different story from what they put in the books. All right. Edward Snowden had a quote in his book, which is behind me. Salakia, let me see if I can grab that real quick. And I believe, yeah, this is Edward Snowden's book, Blacks in Antiquity. Okay, this is Edward Snowden's. I use this book. Frank M. Snowden Jr. All right, Blacks in Antiquity, and basically he's showing you how Europe or Greece went from being so-called black to white. All right, so-called, because they're really brown and red. For you who've been watching and listening, there's no such thing as white people. That's a fabricated, white and black is a fabrication social construct made up by the so-called white man. But I'm trying to find this quote that he wrote in here. And it basically says something to the fact that the artifacts tell a truth that often writers and authors don't. It bears witness to the truth. So you can basically write whatever the hell you want, but the artifacts tell the truth. All right, and that's what I'm trying to find, that quote that he wrote, that he said, you know, because it's definitely in here. Of course, I can't seem to find it right now. but he wrote the importance of artifacts, because the artifacts tell a truth, and even and however you measure it up, because if you look at the time frame that this was happening, the artifact, according to Esau's history that you're going to learn in the colleges and the schools, so-called white men were ruling. So when and where and how did an image like this, did a statue like this get put up? And this statue is in a museum in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. It's either in Scotland or Germany. I forget where it is. The origins of it was Germany, though. So you mean to tell me that there were people like this in Germany in the 8th century? And he clearly wasn't a peasant. This dude is a knight. This dude is wearing armor. He had a shield, a family crest, and a sword hanging from his side. So he wasn't a slave either. So that means it's what you've been watching on TV and what you've been learning in college is an apparent and clear lie. And then it was made so sturdy, so strong, even by knocking a nose off, you can't hide the features of who he is and who he's representing. And it almost looks like there's Hebrew writing scratched into his forehead on top of that. You know, it looks like the paleo, ancient. I'm just looking at his forehead closely. You know? It almost looks like some Hebrew characters written on there. The ancient Hebrew, the block Hebrew. All right? But darn it, I can't find that quote. And of course, when I'm not looking for it, it's going to fall right into my hands. All right? Darn it. But yeah, but he definitely said something to that effect. That it's very important to observe art. And, you know, I don't want to waste any more time looking for it. I just couldn't find it. But now that we said that, let's go into this book. All right. This is the Negro Question, Part 4, Missing Link with Lee Cummings. All right. And we're going to write down what a bunch of historians wrote. Mostly Edomite historians. All right. Both books have a ton of information. Okay. It's page 57, swarthy. It goes to show you, I've just read that word swarthy or Swartz goes back to someone who looks like this man on the screen. All right. Which there's an argument about him because he's being called Saint Maurice, but other people are referring to him as Charlemagne. And it's definitely, you know, from the Dark Ages, either way you look at it. Middle Ages, Dark Ages. Okay? So why and how did he get put up if it was just all white people in Europe and, you know, the whole song? Well, truth be said, all the so-called black people were being murdered and killed off, and their descendants, who a lot of them made babies, as in my other video, made babies with white women, and a lot of their children came out pale or looked like white people. All right, going back to that book of Acts, you know, when he said that it was all black people on the day of Pentecost, which isn't true. But people were coming down with the confusion of face, and you know, because they have been mixing with all the heathens that are round about. And let's prove that real quick with scripture, because this is Acts 2, and I'm gonna start at verse 8, and it says, "And how we hear every man in our own tongue wherein we were born." All right. Well, first let me read verse 5. "And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven." And here are some of the nations where they were coming from. And it says, verse 9, "Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers of Mesopotamia and Judea and Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia and Phrygia and Pamphylia and Egypt and in the parts of Libya and about Cyrene, strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians, we do hear them speak in our own tongues and wonderful works." So the people, the Israelites, mainly the Jews at that point, were going back to the day of Pentecost. And they have been living in all these strange nations and intermingling and mixing with these people. So all of them then look like this knight, this honorable knight on the screen. They all didn't look that way. Okay? So even though they all were Israelites by race, That doesn't necessarily mean that they all look that way. All right, because the scriptures clearly say that we're scattered among the heathen, and we're connected, and part of that curse is the confusion of face. That's the book of Ezra. You can just read Ezra chapter 9, verses like 1 through 8, 1 through 7, and it explains it clearly. It explains it almost exactly the way I just said it. We're intermingling and mixing with the other nations, and now we have the confusion of face. All right, so which is twofold. We're confused about our heritage, and we also look different. So so if you had a village full of Israelites that looked like him, and then you had a long lost brother who's been living among heathen, all right, but his father can be traced back to the village where this image came from, and he shows up 100 years later, you know, or 200 years later, coming back to this village where this image came from, all right, and he doesn't no longer look like them, because he looks like his mother's people. But through the seed, through his father's lineage, he can be traced back to this tribe. Back then, they accepted him with no problem, because they could trace his fathers. All right? We don't have that luxury now. So everything's through the spirit. But all this is just to prove the point. So Lee Cummings, he was on the right path, but you can't just go by color. Okay? Alone. All right? And I'm going to read pages 36 and 37 in the Negro question by Lee Cummings. All right? And it reads, Massacre of Drogheda. All right? Irish History, Ireland Library, 1641, Rebellion. This is a scene of the destruction of Drogheda, Ireland, in the English in 1641. They stripped people naked and drove them into the mountain to freeze to death, but not before uttering a strange statement in English, being wild man. Remember, the Irish were black in the 1600s. Now, it says the English impale Irish children and bash their heads on stones, and these are the eyewitness accounts. So these are the images of that happening. All right, and that driving them into the mountains to freeze to death was payback, because that's what Jake did to Esau after the destruction of Rome and taking them down. That's how they became what you call Caucasians. They were driven up into the Caucasus Mountains. That's in the book of Job, the 30th chapter. All right, Irish History, 1641. It says, and then it also shows you in the old artifacts, in the writing, written in that old English. Okay? All right? And all this was done at the hands of Cromwell. Okay? It says, the editorial that the generation shows spoke and wrote differently, but they can discern the writing in modern English. They took hot tongues and tortured this woman to make her confess where her money was, then burn the bottom of her feet and palms, in the palms of her hands. It is important to remember that these crimes are being done to black Irishmen. These women and their children going backwards in history is like digging in walls and seeing what people do in the imagination of their minds. This part of history of Europe that the geneticist is missing would cause the findings of our generation to make sense. Remember, Irish were black in the 1600s, and they were. All right? And this was all being done at the hands of Cromwell. All right? Page 39. 38 and 39. The scribe says that the great tyranny is done to the sir, his wife and children. If you take a look at this scene, they have ripped the child from the black Irishman's wife's stomach and tossed it to the ground. These are the eyewitness accounts of the actions of the English as they invaded. All right, and so these are drawings from that time period, man. Okay, you can see her on the wall, and they've ripped the baby from her belly and tossed it to the ground. All right, that's what they've done. Okay, that's what you're looking at. And it says the black Irish woman is being roasted over coals of fire while she is being poked with a pitchfork These were the action of English soldiers when they invaded Ireland, man. So the cruelty of and the violence of the so-called white man, they did the same sort of thing in Rome, man. When you read in the book of the Maccabees, how they tortured the 7 sons. All right. It says, these were the actions of the English soldiers when they invaded Ireland. All right. This has also been reported that Cromwell ordered the deaths of the priesthood. Now we know the reason why the English tortured the blacks from West Africa and Europe when they came into the slave colonies. Torture was a practice of theirs. No, and they tortured the ones in West Africa because the people in West Africa were different from the other Africans. They were Israelites. When Rome fell the first time, I mean, when Jerusalem was destroyed, a great majority of the Israelites fled to West Africa. Many fled to Europe and ruled Europe eventually. They scattered in all directions. Okay? And this is the evidence of their presence in Europe right here on the screen, man. All right? It says, torture was a practice of theirs on the other side of the Atlantic. So their actions in the Americas are consistent with their past behavior. All right? So that's enough on that. So now I'm going to read some of the eyewitnesses about eyewitness accounts and give you the names. So listen up. All right. And these are just some of the professors and things of that nature, archaeologists, paleontologists that gave their eyewitness to the account of the people in Europe, in Britain. All right. And this is on page 4. It says, Professor Winchell Alexander, our remote ancestor, 1815 to 1900, collection of journals. These short black men came from Atlantis, northern Africa, and they overran Europe, and they were known as Britons. All right. Roman historian Tacitus, the origins of the Black Britons. All right. The Iberians. Where are these books at in the universities today? The Iberians are black people with curly hair. Anthropological Review Society, London, Volume 8. That's where it came from. Joseph Riston, Annals of the Caledonian Picts and Scots, Volume 2, pages 7 and 27. The Picts, Brits are brown complexion with curly hair. Wow. Ivan Sertima, African Presence in Early Europe, page 225. I actually have that book. The Britons look like the Ethiopians. And in that scripture that says that, that's Amos 9 and 7. Okay. Albert Churchwood, 1912, The Origins of Evolution, pages 12 and 13. The Black Bosque, I mean the bodies that they dug up, were exterminated from Europe. All right. There it is, man. They were exterminated from Europe. Why? Because they whitewashed history. Professor Boyd Dawkins, our earliest ancestors' bygone days, a lecture delivered in the public hall, Collyhurst, Manchester, on January 8th, 1879. The ancient Britons, Irish Scots are short black people. Pages 103 through 107. Wow. Dr. Thurman, Nature Journal of Science, page 92. From the evidence at hand, it seems that the Iberian black man occupied the whole Western Europe at one time. All right. Professor Huxley, 1870. The Iberian Race, page 332. The Iberian Bosque bones have been found all over Europe with his animals. Hey, so you know what? You Edomites are finished, man. And the dude that made that stupid comment about Cromwell, see, you better off just leave us alone, man, and let us teach our people. The more you try to come against us, the more this truth is going to come out and destroy you and what you believe in. All right? So I hope you go and overdose on opioids and take yourself out. You know, swallow this.
So get ready.
Call Halal, Yahawah, Shamawiwan, by Qadash, and a Barbados.